Earlier today, we received some new information regarding Conor McGregor versus Michael Chandler, as well as UFC Noche at the Sphere. We're going to listen to what Ariel Helwani had to say on the MMA Hour regarding the recent leaks of Ilia Topuria versus Max Holloway, as well as Sean O'Malley versus Merab Dvalishvili at the Sphere, and also talking about the UFC's kind of end of 2024 schedule. But also, we're going to take a look at what Dana White had to say on the Pat McAfee show, where he admits he has no current plans for Conor McGregor versus Michael Chandler. And as devastating as that may sound for Michael Chandler, the guy who left his family in early January for the fight, it actually was kind of a positive update. It was the first time in a long time that I heard something from Dana White, at least, and it made me more optimistic about the potential of Conor McGregor versus Michael Chandler actually happening. And in that interview on the Pat McAfee show, Dana White also dropped some interesting details regarding UFC Noche at the Sphere, also known as UFC 306. I want to start off right away with a tweet from Conor McGregor on Saturday. Michael Chandler and Conor McGregor were tweeting together about the shooting that happened Saturday. And I don't have the full tweets. Conor McGregor has me blocked. But the only one that's actually notable is Conor McGregor saying, "I talked to Dana today about our new date. All looking good, 24 for sure." The fact that Conor, I know you have to take Conor's tweets with a grain of salt. He's retired so many times on Twitter. He said so many ridiculous things on Twitter. But the fact he's tweeting directly at Michael Chandler saying, "all looking good, 24 for sure," that's the most promising update Michael Chandler's heard in a while. He's probably, he probably partied for the night and then he got right back to lifting heavy weights. And, the fact that he heard it right from Conor McGregor, there's no doubt that got some excitement. And what's weird is, over the last couple of days, we haven't seen any more desperation tweets from Conor McGregor talking about fighting Islam Makhachev or talking about fighting for the BMF title. So this seems, at least from Conor McGregor's end, as a bit of a positive update. Now, we go into the MMA Hour where he discusses this. We're going to start off with some of the Sphere information from Ariel Helwani. We're kind of going to go in chronological order. He first starts to discuss the recent leak about the Sphere of the Ilia Topuria, Max Holloway, as well as Sean O'Malley versus Merab Dvalishvili. Now, the second I heard that news, I knew that wasn't going to happen. I mean, it's highly unlikely. I wish it would happen. I would love if the UFC did that, but highly unlikely. That's what he starts talking about. And then he gets into Conor McGregor, Michael Chandler here and there. And then he also discusses kind of the end-of-year schedule for the UFC. Let's take a listen.
Sugar Sean O'Malley versus Merab Dvalishvili for the men's bantamweight title. And he mentions Ilia Topuria versus Max Holloway for the men's featherweight title. And so some way, somehow, someone's watching this and tweets about it and clips it off. And then the thing by Sunday morning was all over the place and everyone was going crazy. All right. This is what I know with regards to that. There was never a plan to have those two fights headline the Sphere card. And
that's heartbreaking, by the way. Imagine how banger that card would be. UFC Noche would be incredible. But I knew it was too good to be true. I knew that leak was wrong immediately.
as of right this second, that is not the plan. What I believe happened there, what I think happened there is, local broadcaster maybe is reading stuff, sees rumors, sees a wrong report, and just assumes it's fact. I think it was just a mistake.
So basically, the people who were talking about it on the broadcast made a mistake, unfortunately, and a lot of fans fell for it. Now, in this next clip, he starts talking about what will be the main event and starts talking about the Sphere and talks a little bit about Conor McGregor and Michael Chandler.
They're very tight-lipped when it comes to this stuff. And so I think this was just a mistake. And as of right now, there is no plan to have those two title fights headline the Sphere. As I've said, the same reason why Conor fighting Chandler on the Sphere card would be tremendous and feel like a perfect fit. It's a very expensive card. Dana said a couple of weeks ago, $17 million already allocated and invested in this, and there's more to come. Now, we know that Riyadh season is sponsoring it, and that obviously helps.
I talked about this in my Sphere video from last week, which I'll link down in the description. The card is already expensive. Dana White's been bragging about how expensive it is. He said he had to have the board of directors come in and ask him, where are you spending all this money and whatnot? It's very, very unlikely that Conor McGregor would headline that card, and Ariel talks about it a little bit more.
But they aren't, putting Conor on the on the same card as a card that has another champion because of the whole pay-per-view points thing. And B, he costs way too much money to put on top of that.
So if you don't understand the pay-per-view points, I know most of you probably do, but the champion always gets pay-per-view points, which means, you know, above X amount of buys, you get a cut of the pay-per-view. So, for example, I'm just making up a number. For every pay-per-view you sell above 400,000, you might get $1.50 extra in your check, and then there's escalations in it. You're never going to put a champion, especially a champion like Grasso, on the same card as Conor McGregor, because Conor McGregor is the one actually bringing in the pay-per-views, and now you're putting out money to Grasso that she's not really contributing to bringing in. At least that's what, you know, what Ariel's trying to say here is you're never going to put McGregor on a card with a champion in general at all because of the way the pay-per-view point system is, you know, for champions.
So you could put that aside. And then the two title fights was never the plan. The plan was always the Grasso title defense. As she told us a couple of weeks ago, she is, of course, from Mexico, and it is a love letter to Mexico, as Dana White has said. Noche UFC.
There's no doubt that Grasso is going to fight on the card. Whether it's Grasso versus Shevchenko 3, it seems like Shevchenko does not want to be on this card. Whether it's Grasso versus Manon Fior or potential Grasso super fight. There's been rumors of that. It's going to be something along those lines. She's going to be on the card. Is that the main event? I don't know. I think it's possible that it could be the main event. Dana White kind of made some remarks. You know, I said the Conor McGregor Chandler remarks from Dana were kind of promising, even though he said he has no plans for it. The remarks on the Sphere was kind of just all salesman. It's kind of all salesman. And then, you know, it felt like there were some things that he said that kind of made me think, oh, he's throwing cold water on the Sphere a little bit, but we'll get to that in a minute.
Makes all the sense in the world. She's the only Mexican champion left at the moment. You know, you had Yair as the interim champ. You had Brandon Moreno. And then the plan has, for some time, been Sugar Sean O'Malley versus Merab. Now, both fights aren't official just yet.
So the plan is Sean O'Malley, Merab Dvalishvili, main event of the Sphere, co-main event Grasso versus whoever, a broomstick for all we know. I think that's a great card. I hope that that happens. I'm going to speculate about some other fights that could be on the card at the end of the video, but that sounds good. I hope that happens. I don't know why the UFC hasn't, you know, kind of had the contract signed. We're 2 months away. I hate that they're not necessarily, you know, bringing it down to the wire like they did UFC 300, but the fact that we're 8 weeks out, some guys like 12-week training camps and they don't have a main event announced yet. It's just kind of unfortunate, especially for us fans who are looking forward to the Sphere.
They haven't been signed, but that has been the plan. And as I said, if they did go with that fight, then the other plan would be Ilia versus Max, most likely on the October 5th Utah card, which hasn't been officially announced yet. Also on that card, we suspect Juliana Pena versus Raquel Pennington.
Ilia Topuria, Max Holloway in Utah. I find that hard to believe. I mean, it kind of makes sense when you look at the current schedule, and he's going to talk more about the schedule in a second. How much of an advantage is that for Max Holloway in terms of cardio? You're at elevation. Max Holloway is known for his pace and cardio. That would be crazy. And then also he says Raquel Pennington versus Juliana Pena. I apologize in advance to the Utah fans for that. Why isn't Kayla Harrison fighting for the belt? That makes absolutely no sense that she's not fighting for the belt, but I kind of get it. Juliana Pena doesn't deserve a title fight, but I kind of get it. You know, another undeserved title shot just because Juliana Pena talks. And I guess they're hoping if Pena beats Pennington, Pena versus Harrison is even bigger. But again, Harrison could beat Pennington, and you could say the same thing. But either way, you hear him say, okay, look, this is kind of the plan. O'Malley versus Merab Sphere, Topuria versus Holloway for Utah, which would be absolutely crazy. Now, he gets into the schedule a little bit more, but he also discusses the fact that you have Arman Saryukian waiting in the wings for Islam Makhachev, which is awesome. But he also finally discusses Conor McGregor versus Michael Chandler and when that could potentially happen as well.
And then the October 5th. And then we obviously have Arman and Islam. And I told you a week or so ago, you know, Chandler saying that he's fighting Islam or was offered Islam. Not true.
That was a desperation tweet hoping to lure Conor McGregor out. Maybe it worked. Maybe it didn't.
It's always Arman. He's going to do the PSA. He has said this since, and he's been verbally told that he is fighting for the belt at the end of October in Abu Dhabi.
Which, honestly, I've gotten tired of hearing people say Arman can't fight because of the suspension. The suspension is retroactive to when the incident took place. So it's retroactive to mid-April. So if he does the PSA it's 6-month suspension, so that would mean mid-October Arman would be able to fight. And according to Ariel, it's looking like they're targeting Islam Makhachev versus Arman Tsarukyan in Abu Dhabi in October.
Then you've got the tentative plan being Jon Jones and Stipe in early November at MSG. And as of right now, as I said recently, the hope is Conor versus Chandler in December, on that December, I think, 14th pay-per-view. And Conor even tweeted to Michael Chandler.
That's the tweet that I showed you earlier.
A couple days ago saying, just spoke to Dana and everything is in place. And, he's hoping that he fights in 2024. So that's the layout right there.
So Conor is hoping that he fights in 2024. That doesn't sound super promising, but better than nothing for Michael Chandler. Maybe it does happen. Now, next we're going to look at Dana White. What he had to say on the Pat McAfee show. And honestly, again, he says he has no plans for Conor McGregor versus Michael Chandler. But if I'm being honest, this was the most positive update I've seen from Dana White regarding McGregor versus Chandler since Conor McGregor pulled out with a broken pinky toe. This was the most positive update. Now, basically the initial question they asked Dana White, Conor McGregor tweeted this out, and they referenced this tweet that I showed you earlier in the video. They referenced that tweet, and they asked Dana, is this true? And Dana White goes into talking about the shooting that happened on Saturday and kind of goes into a diatribe here, but I'll let you listen to a little bit. He does say Conor McGregor reached out to him. Listen to this.
Messages. So I was just trying to figure out what was going on with him. And then Conor was one of the guys that reached out to me about him. Obviously his support. And
so there you go. Conor reached out to him after the stuff that happened on Saturday. And then he goes into kind of a diatribe about, the events of Saturday. I'll spare you all those details. But when he finally gets back to talking about McGregor, there's kind of a funny moment here because Dana White goes on and on and on. I mean, it's really probably 40 seconds, but he goes on, and then finally he's like, what were we talking about again? Oh yeah, Jon Jones is pound for pound #1. He has 2 German Shepherds that are trained. He shoots guns, and he also slaps spray paint cans out of teenagers in the streets like a vigilante. This guy's such a badass. Can you believe he did this? Watch this clip.
Disgusted and upset and angry. What is the question you asked me about the fight?
No,
I'm just kidding. He just lost his train of thought. But I really thought he was about to go on. Yeah, Jon Jones is pound for pound #1. Any educated adult would say so. He didn't actually say the stuff about Jon Jones. I was kidding around. But he goes on for 30, 40 seconds, and he says, what did you ask me again? What about the fight? What are you trying to ask me about the fight? And the guy rephrases the question. And then this is his answer. This is kind of his update on the Conor McGregor-Michael Chandler fight.
Yeah, that's the fight that needs to happen. We've been waiting for it. It's an awesome fight. It's a fun fight. And, as of sitting here right now, no, I don't have a date for it or a plan or anything like that.
So as I'm sitting here right now, I don't have a date or plan for it. But he says, that's the fight everyone wants to see. And he goes a little bit further. And this is where I say there's a little bit of a positive update here for Michael Chandler or Conor McGregor, who wants to return to the cage. This is the positive update. Listen to what he says next.
And obviously, me, the fans, and ESPN would love it to happen in 24, but we'll see what happens.
Okay.
So we would love to see it happen in 2024, but we'll see what happens. I mean, that's positive rather than Dana White saying, I'm not thinking about that. I'm not thinking about it till he's healed. I'm not talking about it. I have no date for it. I mean, he did say he has no plans for it, but that's better than nothing. Now, I'm going to be honest. If I was at 1% Conor McGregor, Michael Chandler happening, after Conor McGregor tweeting to Chandler directly, Dana White kind of, being a bit positive here, even though he said he has no plans, maybe I'm at 10% now. I think the probability of it happening is going up a little bit. I still am never going to, no matter what happens, I'm never going to, if it gets announced again, I'm going to say I'm not believing it until they step in the cage. I wouldn't trust it. It's already been 2 years. But at this point, he says, we hope that happens in 2024. Imagine you're Michael Chandler, who's been waiting since 2022, and you hear Dana White say, yeah, we're hoping that it happens in 2024. So hopefully it happens for Michael Chandler's sake, for the fans' sake who are looking forward to that fight. I don't really care about that fight too much. But next he moves on to discussing the Sphere. And this is kind of, hit or miss. You can take some subtle information from Dana here. And some of the things that he said had me again questioning how enjoyable the Sphere is going to be for the fans who would attend live, but also how it's going to look on TV. But mainly the live fans here. He kind of makes some remarks that has me kind of scratching my head like, what? How's that going to work? Because the layout of the Sphere is kind of weird for especially a live sporting event where they want 360-degree audience, but it's not really possible at the Sphere. But Dana White talks about, how that's achievable. Now, he starts off with the same diatribe. He always talks about Tom Brady hit me up and you too and this and that. But there's something important here. I want you to listen to this very carefully.
So we end up going, and 20 minutes into it, I'm blown away by, everything. I start to realize U2 is not the star of this show. The Sphere is the star of this show.
Yes.
Right?
It's not who's performing who's the star of the show. It's the Sphere itself. That doesn't give me a lot of promise. That doesn't give me a lot of promise for them announcing a main event. I'm feeling more and more like it's going to be a Grasso main event. I'm feeling more and more like Grasso is going to headline this card. Maybe I'm wrong, but what Dana White said here makes me feel like, I don't know what, I couldn't put a percentage on it. But Dana White saying, and he said other comments like this. Go watch my other Sphere video. Him saying, the Sphere's really the star of the show. That tells me he's already baking in, Alexa Grasso is going to be the main event of UFC Noche. That's what that tells me right there.
Right? And I'm like, I'm doing this. I'm going to be the first guy to ever do a live sporting event from the Sphere.
Okay, and we've heard this a million times. Dana White, first guy, utmost experts, and give these guys a Grammy, Emmy, all that, which way. Now, he starts talking about the seating arrangement. He's asked specifically, great question, by the way. He's asked specifically about the seating arrangement. And this is kind of what gets me thinking, how is this going to be for live fans? How is it? And I've been saying that for a while.
Yeah, a little for sure.
But are you going to want people to sit down, though? Isn't like the seats in the suite a part of it? Have you thought about that?
Yeah, so you're going to have the people that are in the seats, the people that are in the suites, and then the bottom level where people are actually standing and will watch the whole thing standing room only.
How long is this card going to be? He answers how many fights there's going to be on the card. But you're going to buy a ridiculously expensive ticket to stand on concrete. I know a lot of people stand up at the events anyway. But that's crazy. I wonder if they're just going to surround the cage with standing room and have like barriers. I'm wondering if that's what they're going to do. But that's very interesting. This is the first real bit of information. Every time Dana White's asked about the Sphere, he says, I'll get to it later. I'm going to tell you about it later. We'll talk about it later. But now the lower level is going to be standing room only? Okay.
And then there will be bleachers and seats, and it's going to be I'm already $17 million into this thing.
I wonder where the bleachers and seats are going to be. It's kind of a weird answer. He kind of makes it out like it's going to be standing room, so I wonder if there's going to be... It's hard to really unpack that completely, but I guess there's going to be somewhere where there might be a bleacher, somewhere where there might be some seats, and then there's going to be standing room around the octagon is what it seems like. But again, you heard what he said. Take it with a grain of salt. We'll see what actually happens. I can't wait to find out more information on this.
And we're not anywhere near September yet. So when I tell you guys, when I say that I'm going to put on the greatest live sporting event in the history of combat sports, maybe in sports, period.
All right, so we've heard this before. The sales pitch of the Sphere. I've already spent $17 million. It's making it sound more and more like he's going to put the cheapest possible champion as a headliner. Which, Grasso... I'm telling you right now, if Grasso's the main event, he's going to say Grasso's Mexican. Who else are we going to have headline an event that's a love letter to Mexico? This is for Mexican Independence Day. Of course she was going to be the main event. That's what it's seeming more and more to me as. That's what it seems like. Now, he gets into a little bit more of his little pitch here. And, we've heard some of this before, but I just figured I would include this. He talks a little bit more about the event and how it's going to play out, basically.
Think about fighting and the history of fighting. Some of the baddest human beings that have ever walked the face of the earth have been Mexicans, right? And Mexicans, it's Mexican Independence Day. And when you think about the history of combat in Mexico, you realize their flag is a battle between like a serpent and an eagle.
So again, hyping up the Mexican Independence Day. I feel like this is Uncle Rico and Kip selling me Tupperware. I've heard this so many times at this point. Like, put the Tupperware under the van's tire, run it over, try to sell it to me, speed off. Okay? Now, the most important, depending on, the way you look at this interview, the most important part regarding the Sphere that he actually comes out and says is him talking about how many fights are actually on the card. Because the way this guy asked the question is very bizarre. I think I left the question in here. But he says, Well, you have main events and main events and main events, and how many fights are going to be on this card? Dana White actually gives a solid answer.
Of the evening, obviously on Mexican Independence Day, we're excited for that. How many fights are going to be on the card? Do you know that?
I cut it out. He was talking about, I thought he was talking, he said it like just before this, talking about main events and how many main events you're going to have, which made no sense. But how many fights are going to be on the card?
We're going to do 10.
10? Is it going to be like a fight week type? Like what type of card? Because you got to balance, right? Main event.
Here it is. I was a little bit confused. It was prior. I thought it was prior, but it's right after
It's
that.
main events. But if you have 5 main events, how many main events? Or are you not worried about that?
There'll be
But what the hell was that? That was a massive word salad. That was a massive. What was that even? Listen to this.
Main events. But if you have 5 main events, how many main events? Or are you not worried about that?
There'll be a main and co-main, and obviously this card will be very Mexican heavy.
So again, you know, I know he's been talking about Mexican Independence Day, but it's going to be very Mexican heavy. Let's take a look at the current card right now. This is the current card. He says, but the big piece of information there was we're going to have 10 fights. How many fights do we currently have confirmed? We have Irene Aldana, Norma Dumont, Michelle Pineda, Anthony Hernandez, which is a straight up banger. Yasmin Howergy, Ketlin Souza, Edgar Chairez versus Kevin Borjas, and Ronaldo Rodriguez versus Ode Osborne. That's what we currently have for the Sphere. So that leads me to wonder, what else could potentially headline, or not headline the Sphere, what else could be on the Sphere? Because you have 5 fights left. If Dana White's saying 10 fights, which is odd because they typically do 12 or 13, I wonder if it's because of the broadcast or they're cutting down on cost. It seems like a cost-cutting measure to me. That's what it seems like. Typically it's 12 to 14 fights, sometimes even a little bit more. But usually I would say it's 12 or 13. The fact they're only having 10, that means they're cutting down on time in the Sphere. They're cutting down on the graphics they have to make for the Sphere. They're cutting down on all the cost for the Sphere in general. But what else could be on the Sphere? If these are the 5 fights that we currently have, what else could be in the Sphere? So obviously the no-brainer is Sean O'Malley, Merab Dvalishvili. That's one that Ariel Helwani already mentioned. I hope that that's the main event. If that's the main event, I'm sold on UFC Noche. You will not hear any more complaints from me. That will be a banger card. But what else? I had me thinking, what else could be on the card? Obviously, Grasso-Shevchenko 3, or Grasso versus Manon-Fior, or Grasso versus Weili Zhang has been rumored again. You know, it could be one of those fights for the co-main. That would be a banger. So there's 2 fights right there. I hope that's what it is. But then some other fights that it could potentially be. Diego Lopez versus Movsar Evloev 2. You know, or really Diego Lopez against anyone would be interesting. That fight makes perfect sense. Diego Lopez has said he wants to fight on the Sphere. You also have Brandon Moreno. Who could Brandon Moreno fight? Seems like Brandon Moreno would be on the Sphere card. I would love Brandon Moreno versus Tatsuro Taira. That would be incredibly interesting for the flyweight division, and it could be a #1 contender fight. That'd be a banger fight. We're going to need somebody. You know, they want to have Mexicans on the card. Brandon Moreno is one of the biggest names, biggest name, you know, who is Mexican in the UFC. So that would make a lot of sense. And also, you could do Yair Rodriguez versus Dan Ige. I also think that would make a lot of sense. So I have the rankings up here, you know, just to kind of look through. But talk about the title fight, Sean O'Malley defending his belt. You come down here, Alexa Grasso defending her belt, as well as those other fights that I mentioned, and some couple other fights that could be put on the card. And again, this is too many fights, so it would only be 5 of these. You could also do Daniel Zellhuber versus Thiago Moises. And you could also do Raul Rosas Jr. versus Davy Grant. Those were some fights I came up with. It seems like, and actually let me go back to this. If you look at the previous Noche card, Raul Rosas Jr. on the card. Daniel Zellhuber on the card. So I think Raul versus Davy Grant would make a lot of sense in terms of like kind of like a veteran on the downslope that maybe Raul could beat to kind of get close to the top 15. And then Daniel Zellhuber, I think a fight against Thiago Moises would be very, very interesting. So that would be another fight that would make a lot of sense for the Sphere. So ultimately, we'll see. They already promised Diego Lopez. They already promised Dan Ige. They already promised Grasso. So there's 3 fights right there if all 3 of those names stay on the card. So really, you only have the opportunity for 2 more fights if those 3 stay intact. So hopefully Sean O'Malley versus Merab Dvalishvili, and then hopefully one other big fight, whether it be Brandon Moreno, Yair Rodriguez. Those fights would make a lot of sense. But I'm telling you, Dana's giving me weird vibes about the Sphere. He's giving me very weird vibes, saying, oh, it's costing too much money, and we're only going to do 10 fights, and it's going to be standing room only so we can, you know, pack them in like sardines. Very, very intriguing. He discussed Conor McGregor versus Michael Chandler as well. Gave us an update on that. Let me know what you guys think about all this down in the comments. Like the video, share the video, subscribe to the channel, and thank you so much for watching.